Hello, my name is Tony Dong. Supreme Court allows limited version of Trump's travel ban to take effect and will consider case in fall. The Supreme Court agreed Monday to allow a limited version of President Trump's ban on travelers from 6 mostly Muslim countries to take effect and will consider in the fall the president's broad powers in immigration matters in a case that raises fundamental issues of national security and religious discrimination. The court made an important exception. It said the ban may not be enforced against foreign nationals who have a credible claim of a bona fide relationship with a person or entity in the United States. In the unsigned opinion, the court said that a foreign national who wants to visit or live with a family member would have such a relationship, and so would students from the designated countries Libya, Iran, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen, who were admitted to a U.S. university. The court said it would hear the case when it reconvenes in October, but it also indicated in the ruling that things may change dramatically by then. It asked the parties to address whether the case would be moot by the time it hears it. The ban is supposed to be a temporary one, while the government reviews its vetting procedures, and the justices said they fully expect the government to be able to conduct its review within the 90-day span the executive order proposes. That affects the ban on travel from the 6 countries and a 120-day ban on all refugees entering the United States, with the exceptions noted by the court. In a statement, Trump called the ruling a clear victory for our national security. Today's ruling allows me to use an important tool to protect our nation's homeland. I also am particularly gratified that the Supreme Court's decision was 9-0, he said. The president said last week the ban would go into effect 72 hours after receiving an approval from the courts. Justices Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito Jr. and Neil M. Gorsuch would have let the ban take effect as written and objected to what they called the court's compromise. A partial stay will burden executive officials with the task of deciding on peril of contempt whether individuals from the 6 affected nations who wish to enter the United States have a sufficient connection to a person or entity in this country, Thomas wrote. Such a compromise, the justices said, will lead to a flood of litigation over what constitutes a bona fide relationship before the overall case is resolved after oral argument in the fall. They added that the court has made an implicit conclusion that the administration will prevail. The proposed travel ban has been a major point of contention between Trump and civil rights groups, which say it was motivated by unconstitutional discrimination against Muslims. Trump contends the ban is necessary to protect the nation, while the administration decides whether tougher vetting procedures and other measures are needed. He has railed against federal judges who have blocked the move because the executive order was stopped by lower courts. Travelers from those countries have been entering the United States following normal visa procedures. Trump first moved to implement the restrictions in January, in his first week in office. His first executive order went into effect immediately and resulted in chaos at airports in the United States and abroad, as travelers from the targeted countries were either stranded or sent back to their countries. Lawyers for challengers to the order rushed to federal courts, and the order was stayed within days. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit eventually said the order could not be implemented, infuriating the president, who said he would take the case to the Supreme Court, but instead, his administration regrouped and issued a second order in March. It added a section detailing national security concerns, removed Iraq from the list of countries affected, deleted a section that had targeted Syrian refugees, and removed a provision that favored Christian immigrants. His lawyers told courts that the new order was written to respond to the Ninth Circuit's concerns. But new lawsuits were immediately filed, and federal judges once again stopped the implementation. A federal district judge in Maryland stopped the portion of the order affecting travelers from the 6 countries. A judge in Hawaii froze that portion, and the part affecting the refugee programs. Appeals courts on both coasts upheld those decisions. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit in Richmond agreed with U.S. District Judge Theodore D. Chuang in Maryland, who sided with opponents in finding that the ban violates the Constitution by intentionally discriminating against Muslims.
Right now,
in a 10-3 decision, the court noted Trump's remarks before and after his election about implementing a ban on Muslims, and said the executive order in context drips with religious intolerance, animus and discrimination. The president's authority the court said, cannot go unchecked when, as here, the president wields it through an executive edict that stands to cause irreparable harm to individuals across this nation, Chief Judge Roger L. Gregory wrote. Meanwhile, a three-judge panel of the Ninth Circuit said Trump had not adhered to federal law in which Congress gives the president broad power in immigration matters. The Ninth Circuit opinion did not dwell on Trump's public comments, nor did it declare that the president had run afoul of the Constitution, because his intent was to discriminate. Instead, the judges ruled that the travel ban lacked a sufficient national security or other justification that would make it legal, and that violated immigration law. There is no finding that present vetting standards are inadequate, and no finding that absent the improved vetting procedures there likely will be harm to our national interests, the judges wrote. These identified reasons do not support the conclusion that the entry of nationals from the 6 designated countries would be harmful to our national interests. They added that national security is not a talismanic incantation that, once invoked, can support any and all exercise of executive power. In both appeals courts, a minority of conservative judges had said their colleagues were making a mistake. Judges should look only to whether the executive orders were proper on their face, they said, without trying to decide if the president had ulterior motives, and defer to national security decisions made by the executive branch. The Supreme Court surely will shudder at the majority's adoption of this new rule that has no limits or bounds, wrote dissenting Fourth Circuit Judge Paul V. Niemeyer. Trump thundered on Twitter after the judicial setbacks that the second executive order was a watered-down version of the first. And while his lawyers in court described the action as a temporary pause in immigration, and administration officials corrected reporters who called it a travel ban, Trump did not agree. People, the lawyers and the courts can call it whatever they want, but I am calling it what we need and what it is, a travel ban. He wrote. Thank you for watching. For the follow-up, subscribe to the channel yourself here to provide for the nation's security. That includes being able to close the borders based on an evaluation of the potential of foreign threats, at least for now. The Supreme Court justices will fully consider the arguments on both sides next autumn. Of course, by that time it may not matter. The administration has 3 months to conduct its executive review of immigration policy and devise new guidelines. In the meantime, the gates to America just got a bit smaller. The court said it could not uphold lower court injunctions barring enforcement of the ban against foreigners who have no connection to the United States at all. Denying entry to such a foreign national does not burden any American party by reason of that party's relationship with the foreign national, the court said. The court also said it would allow a 120-day ban on all refugees entering the U.S. to go into effect, allowing the government to bar entry to refugee claimants who do not have any bona fide relationship with an American individual or entity. Justices Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, and Neil Gorsuch wrote in the ruling that they would have allowed the travel ban to go into full effect, pending a review. The ruling hands a major victory to Mr. Trump, who restored a 5-4 conservative majority to the Supreme Court when his nominee, Justice Gorsuch, joined its bench in April. There are 5 Republican appointees on the court and 4 Democratic appointees. Mr. Trump's policy had been left in limbo since it was struck down by federal judges in Hawaii and Maryland, who found it to be discriminatory. Those lower courts ruled against the executive order days after the president issued a revised version with a narrower scope on the 6th of March. The original ban, released on the 27th of January, provoked mass protests at American airports. The president's revised order calls for a 90-day ban on travelers from Libya, Iran, Somalia, Sudan, Syria and Yemen. It also introduces a 120-day ban on all refugees entering the U.S. to enable the government to implement stronger vetting procedures. Mr. Trump issued the orders amid a slew of terrorist attacks in Paris, London, Brussels, Berlin, and other cities. However, critics called the policy un-American and Islamophobic. The president was unhappy about the March order, calling it a watered-down, politically correct version of the first one. January's original executive order included Iraq among nations whose travelers would be barred from the U.S. and imposed a full ban on refugees from Syria. Thank you for watching. For the follow-up, subscribe to the channel yourself here.